I walked into court smelling like roses and printer ink. By noon, the judge would read a voicemail where my own son explained how he'd fix me by signing papers that would lock me away. By evening, I'd be back under the neon sign of my brand new flower shop, counting a day's receipts with hands that everyone insisted were too old to hold a pen. If you're wondering how a 64-year-old grandmother with a thrift store blazer and dirt under her nails ended up fighting for her freedom in a courtroom scented like copy toner, start with a trailer park, a knock at my door, and a brother I hadn't seen in 32 years. The summer I turned 64, the window unit in my single-wide sang a tired rattle that shook dust from the blinds every time it tried to cool the place. I slept on a fold-out couch because the bedroom door had swollen with humidity and wouldn't close. I didn't have the heart to ask Earl from Lot 17 to plane it again. My grandson, Benji, had drawn me a picture of a sunflower wearing glasses. I taped it above the sink, right where the faucet coughed rusty water into a chipped teacup. I kept busy. Mornings I clipped wildflowers and wayward greenery from the ditch behind the park, coaxing them into mason jar arrangements that I sold down at the flea market. $10 for something that looked like Sunday. Nobody ever asked about the small tin I kept in the back of my pantry coffee can, actually rattling with quarters and bravery. After Frank died and the debts found me before the condolences did, I learned to count hope in exact change. If you've never lived in a trailer park, you might assume it's sorrow with aluminum siding. Sometimes it is. But it is also Mrs. Alvarez from Lot 5 who bakes too many empanadas and pretends it's an accident, Darnell who fixes mufflers for the price of a smile, kids who share scooters with the seriousness of diplomats, and old men on milk crates holding Congress about the price of everything and the honesty of no one. I was both lonely and loved there, invisible and seen. The day everything changed, I'd just finished tying blue ribbon around 6 mismatched jars when a pickup pulled up in a spray of gravel. It wasn't the usual landlord swagger. The engine shut off, and a man stepped out with a bouquet in one hand and a box in the other. Not a delivery man. Not a debt collector. He stood there, squinting toward the sun, then toward me, like he had to decide which light would blind him less. "Flora?" He asked, my name hanging between us like a question he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. Nobody had called me Flora in a long time without adding, "Ma'am." "Harlan," I said, before my mind agreed to say it. Because memory lives in the bones. Because the way his shoulders sloped was an old family story. Because the scar on his knuckle was what you get when you punch the same wooden fence 3 summers in a row. Because some people disappear without going far. He smiled then, and the years folded like laundry. "You look like Mama," when she was about to say, "Don't be a fool," Harlan said, toeing off his boots to keep from scratching the vinyl. He hadn't been inside my life in 3 decades, but he knew to take his shoes off. That felt like a mercy. He set the bouquet, roses, tastefully arranged on the chipped kitchen counter. Beside it, he placed the box and didn't open it. I poured 2 glasses of sweet tea, the cheap kind that stains your tongue caramel. We sat, and the window unit rattled like a persistent thought. "I watched you at the flea market yesterday," he said. "Didn't want to scare you by walking up. You were good. People smiled when you put the last stem in. You've always been good with growing things." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so I took a long drink and did neither. "Where have you been, Harlan?" He looked at the sunflower with glasses above my sink. "Chasing what I thought mattered. Failing at it in beautiful houses. Succeeding at it in ugly offices. Kids?" I asked. He shook his head. "A mistake I'll live with, but not what I regret most." He looked at me then, finally. "I regret leaving you with him." By him, he meant our father. And by leaving, he meant the night he packed a gym bag at 17 and climbed out the window, whispering that he'd come back for me when he was set. He didn't. Life is made of decisions made once and paid for daily. He tapped the box like it might bite. "This is not an apology," he said. "It's a key to a door I closed on you." "What's in it?" "Enough." Not an answer. I pulled the twine loose. Inside, a banker's envelope, thick as Sunday paper, and a single laminated card with the contact for an attorney whose last name had more letters than a hymn. The envelope held a cashier's check with more zeros than a person my age is told to expect. $1 million. written out in clean serif letters, like the kind of number that doesn't sweat. I stared until the corner of the check blurred. I can't. You can, he said. You will. I told myself I'd put you through college. I told myself I'd buy you a house with a backyard big enough to get lost in. I told myself a lot of things and then I didn't show up. I sold a logistics company last spring. The money is clean. It's yours. Do with it what you want. He paused, and his voice softened. But I hope you'll do something you'd be proud to die doing. What would you have me do, since you came all this way with a suggestion taped to your generosity? He smiled. Open a flower shop. Stop selling sundaes for $10. I slept with the check tucked beneath my pillow, the fear of losing it wrestling with the fear of keeping it. By morning, I knew two things. I didn't want to leave the people who had become my unexpected family, and I didn't want to die counting quarters. So I took the bus downtown and walked the block with the thrift store, the pawn shop, and the old laundromat that had gone dark 2 years ago. The sign still said Spin City, with a couple of letters sagging like tired teeth. The landlord at the laundromat was a woman named Joy who wore her name like a dare. She looked at my hands, then at my eyes, then at the check like it might sprout legs and run. By afternoon, I'd signed a lease on a space that smelled like detergent and new beginnings. Joy knocked $500 off the rent after I offered to keep the sidewalk pots blooming year-round and make the entrance look less like a sad sigh. I picked a name after tossing out $100, not elegant Latin, not botanical jargon. Bluebird and Bloom. You hear it and you know there's hope on the branch and color on the counter. Harlan walked me through setting up an LLC, opened a business account for me, then handed me a list of people to avoid and a list of people to call. I hired a carpenter from our park, Mr. Wyatt, to build a wooden counter that could survive a hurricane and a run of wedding season. The first night I turned the key in the new lock, the empty room echoed like a struck bell. I thought of Frank and how he would have lifted me up and spun me in the middle of that echo, his laugh bouncing off the tile. I sat on the floor anyway, back against the wall, and sketched the space on a legal pad. Cooler here. Counter there. Chalkboard menu by the window, so people could read while waiting for the bus. A table with a kettle for tea and a jar marked, "Pay what you wish." A shelf with old books you could borrow without asking. I called my grandson. "Benji," I said. "What should Grandma's shop sell, besides flowers?" "Cookies," he said immediately. "And the flowers should have names. Like people." Done and done. We opened on a Saturday that threatened rain and delivered it in a steady, forgiving way. I wore my thrift store blazer because the pockets swallowed fear. The chalkboard read, "Welcome to Bluebird and Bloom. Choose your JY." Beneath it, I'd written a handful of simple bouquets with names: Payday, Spray Roses, Eucalyptus, Confidence. Peach Pie, Peonies, Baby's Breath, Mercy. Apology accepted, Tulips, Waxflower, a small note card. By 9 a.m., we had a line of people who didn't mind the drizzle. Some came because I'd posted flyers at the laundromat and pawn shop and library. Some came because they knew me from the flea market. Some came because the bus stop sent them, sheltering under our awning and letting the smell of lilies do the convincing. A girl about 19 with chipped black nail polish hovered by the peonies. "These smell like wanting," she said. "They smell like remembering," I said. She laughed and bought 3. A man in paint-splattered jeans asked for whatever bouquet, made the word sorry believable but not pathetic. I made him one with humility in it. Around noon, a woman in a tailored suit stepped in and shook her umbrella until the floor sparkled. She looked like she could buy a store by accident. She didn't look at the flowers. She looked at me. Her gaze felt like a test. "You're Flora Steele?" she asked. "I am," I said. "I've learned to use my full name when I mean business." She handed me a business card: Leslie Delgado, attorney at law, elder law, and small business support. "Your brother said you might need me one day," she said, and took a cookie as if it were part of the negotiation. "Today?" I asked, half laughing. She glanced toward the window. Outside, a man stood beneath the awning, reading the chalkboard with an expression that made the peonies seem insufficient to our needs. My son, Caleb. Caleb had been a beautiful boy who'd memorized dinosaur facts in my face. He grew up into a man with a calendar he worshipped and a patience reserved for clients, not mothers. We drifted after his father died. Grief is a tide that puts people in different boats. When he married Tara, she took to management like it was oxygen. We have to be practical, she'd say, and then suggest things that benefited her practicality. He pushed the door open and stood just inside the threshold, as wary as if I'd opened a tiger sanctuary instead of a flower shop. "Mom," he said, smiling the careful smile he used in photos. "Sweetheart," I said. "You're just in time to smell something you can't spreadsheet." He looked around at the bouquets, the cookies, the chalkboard. He looked at the line of customers and the way they stood, soft-shouldered, patient, as if the air itself had done something to them. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Always." In the back room, the cooler thrummed like a healthy heart. Caleb didn't sit. He paced a small rectangle as if he could wear the floor thin enough to see a better answer below it. "Tara saw a photo online," he said. "You and a ribbon cutting. Uncle Harlan. A sign that looks permanent." "It is," I said, because I had decided the minute the paint dried. He stopped pacing. "Where did you get the money?" "From your uncle," I said. "He did well and did right." "How much?" He asked it like a dentist asking about pain. Braced for a lie. "A lot," I said. "Enough to begin again with a full tank." He ran a hand through his hair, the same stubborn wave he had at 8, and sighed like something was breaking, and he didn't want me to hear it. "You should have told me." I wanted to say, "When you needed help with a down payment, I emptied my savings, and you called it a practical decision, not love. When you told me I was forgetting things because I put the salt in the freezer one time, I started labeling everything with a Sharpie so you wouldn't worry. When you texted that you were too busy to come by, I pretended it was my choice not to ask twice. Instead, I said I didn't want to argue." "Who said anything about arguing?" His smile returned, tight around the edges. "You're 64, Mom. This is a lot. A business is hard. Finances are complicated. Liability. Taxes. You should be enjoying your grandkids, not hauling buckets and counting petals." "I'm enjoying this," I said, and meant it so hard my throat ached. He looked at the cooler, at the invoices pinned to the corkboard, at the neat rows of vases. Then he looked me in the face. "Tara, and I think it's time you consider something safer. Assisted living. We can help you sell this. We can make sure the money is managed properly. So you're taken care of." The words fell heavy as wet leaves. Managed properly. Taken care of. I heard what he wasn't saying. Given to someone younger with clipboards. Put somewhere supervised, so I couldn't embarrass him by living. "I'm taken care of," I said quietly. "By me." He reached into his leather folio and slid a document across the stainless steel table. I didn't touch it, but I could read the heading upside down. Petition for appointment of guardian of person and estate. My name was there, bracketed by a system that thought it knew me. "I don't want to do this," Caleb said, and then looked relieved to have said the thing usually said after the thing is already done. Chapter 6. What People Call Love. The shop didn't pause for my shock. Rain brought people in with stories and coupons for their own hearts. I made a bouquet called Second Wind, Snapdragons, Statusy, Time, while my mind tried to climb the wall in front of me. Leslie Delgado stood at the chalkboard writing her cell number under the words Legal Clinic Tuesdays, questions welcome. She caught my eye and gave a nod that meant, "Keep cutting stems. I'll hold the rest." Caleb didn't buy flowers. He left with the petition, the folio, and a face I recognized from when he was 5 and thought loud meant right. By closing, my feet ached the honest ache that money doesn't soften. Joy from the landlord popped her head in to say the awning had never looked so friendly. Harlan called and said he'd be by tomorrow to hang the last shelf. I turned the sign to closed and locked the door twice, because independence is easier to sleep with when you double-check the latch. Back at the trailer, the window unit was quiet for once. Lightning stitched a careful hem across the sky. I spread Caleb's petition on the table like a map of a place I refused to go. He must have filed it before he came. The court stamp wore today's date like a dare. The reasons listed: concerns regarding memory lapses, management of substantial new funds, susceptibility to undue influence, safety in activities of daily living. He made me sound like a broken vase someone had stood back up with glue and a wish. I brewed chamomile and took a slow sip, Then I pulled a pad of paper from the drawer labeled pens in my sharpest script and began my own list. Reasons I'm not a lamp. I have a business license. I signed a lease and negotiated maintenance. I manage inventory and payroll. I keep accurate books and can tell you exactly how many stems I ordered yesterday, 300, and how many sold, 247. I know where the salt is. I am allowed to be happy. By morning, Leslie sat across from me at the shop's work table with her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, the universal sign for goodwill and war. Guardianship is serious, she said. It's meant for protection, not convenience. It's also sometimes misused by family who confuse love with control or fear with prudence. I raised a boy who believes a binder can save him, I said softly. I just never thought he'd try to save me from myself. We'll answer, she said. First, a cognitive assessment from a neutral geriatrician. Second, documentation of your independence. Third, evidence that Caleb's motive is less than pure, if it is. But I don't need to prove greed. I just need to prove you're not incapacitated. She smiled, just a little. If the court has a nose, we'll also let it smell your shop. I laughed, breathing for the first time since the petition. Do judges like peonies? They like clarity, she said. And peonies. She sent me to Dr. Sato, a geriatrician who looked like she could rebuild a carburetor between exams. Dr. Sato asked me to draw a clock. I drew 2, one for business hours, one for napping, and remember 3 words. She made me do math without a calculator and tell her what I'd do if I smelled smoke while making tea. I gave answers and also explained why a bouquet called Forgive Yourself should always include something green. At the end, she shook my hand and said, Your mind is not a house in decline, it's a garden in good order. Chapter 8. Paper Trails and Breadcrumbs. Leslie turned my life into a binder of her own. Behind tabs labeled capacity, finances, business operations, and community support, she tucked contracts with wholesalers, a copy of the lease with Joy's scribbled discount, bank statements showing deposits and not mysterious withdrawals, a ledger so tidy it could pass inspection by a mother-in-law, and a stack of handwritten notes from customers who wrote things like your bouquet made my divorce bearable, and I smelled something good for the first time since I got my diagnosis. Judges are not immune to sincerity, Leslie said, sliding a note into a clear sleeve. What about motives? I asked. We don't impugn if we don't need to, she said. But if your son filed an emergency petition, he probably thinks he has a story to sell. A missed bill, a burned pan, a forgotten appointment. I smiled. The bill I missed was a deliberate delay because the landscaper overcharged me. I negotiated it down 20% after Tara said I should just pay it to avoid attention. The burned pan was from Benji Learning Pancakes. And the appointment I forgot was mine to cancel because a supplier tried to tack on a fee labeled seasonal optimism. Leslie laughed then, the real kind. Let's also change your estate documents, she said. Not to invite trouble, but to lock your doors. Durable power of attorney naming someone you trust who isn't Caleb or Tara. Healthcare proxy. A simple will. And this is my favorite, a letter explaining your choices in your own words in case anyone loses their hearing when they read the legalese. I chose Harlan as my backup person, not because I wanted to punish Caleb, but because you shouldn't hand the steering wheel to someone who keeps trying to change your destination. I invited Caleb to the trailer for dinner, thinking corn on the cob might remind his mouth who raised it. He arrived without Tara, which surprised me until he explained she was meeting with a consultant. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't pry. We ate with the kind of quiet that isn't peace. After, I set a bouquet called Truce between us, white roses, olive branches, patience, and said, I got your petition. He set down his fork like setting down a weapon. I'm trying to help. Help looks like asking what I want, I said. It looks like carrying buckets instead of carrying me. It looks like believing I know myself. You left the stove on last month, he said. I turned it back on to warm the pan because Benji likes crispy edges, I said. And then I turned it off again. You stopped by mid-sizzle and decided on a narrative. He rubbed his forehead. Mom, there's a lot of money here. That changes things. It changes things if you decide I'm a prize instead of a person, I said. My voice didn't shake. I was grateful. He reached for his folio, then stopped. Tara thinks. What do you think? He looked at me then, not the way a son looks at a checklist, but the way a boy looks at a mother who knows where the salt is. His eyes shone and then didn't. I think you've been poor for so long it scares me to imagine you making a mistake with that much money. There it is, I said, and my shoulders unclenched. Fear is softer to sit with than greed. It scares me too. But fear can sit in the passenger seat. It can't drive. He smiled, just a little. That sounds like something you'd put on your chalkboard. It does, I said. And when I write it there, will you come read it and buy something? He nodded. After we get through court. After. I filed, Mom. And Tara hired a helper. We booked a capacity evaluation with a doctor she knows. A doctor who builds carburetors between exams? I asked. He winced. Not exactly. It landed like a blessing disguised as error. On a Tuesday night 2 weeks before the hearing, my phone buzzed at 11:18 p.m. A voicemail from Caleb. I pressed my finger to the glass and listened to my son's voice, familiar as my own heartbeat. Hey, Tara, he began, and I felt my face tighten. I left Mom's with the petition. She didn't sign anything. Don't freak out. Delgado will make this complicated. I know. But once we get temporary guardianship, I can redirect the accounts, liquidate the shop before she sinks too much into it, and list the trailer before the market turns. She'll thank us later. Or she won't. Either way, it'll be done. A pause. A sigh. And then softer, like he'd fallen into the truth without planning to. I can't keep doing this with the firm breathing down my neck, and the second mortgage. The shop money would give us all breathing room. He hung up without realizing he'd left it for me. I saved the message, then I saved it again, as if double saving could guard it from the kind of fate that befalls proof. When I played it for Leslie the next morning, she didn't smile. She just nodded, slow and sad. We don't actually need this, she said. But it makes a clear picture clearer. Do we show him mercy? I asked. We show the court the truth, she said. Mercy can be shaped afterward. Waiting is its own chore. I did mine by working. Early deliveries to the hospital where maternity wards smelled like hope and antiseptic. Funeral sprays stitched with quiet. Tuesday legal clinics at a card table by the tea kettle where people asked questions about wills and leases while sniffing carnations as if the answers might be hidden in the petals. Kids came after school to do homework at the round table in back, bribed with cookies and the promise of naming bouquets. We added one called I Did It Anyway, ranunculus, rosemary, stubbornness. A retired teacher named Mrs. Boone started volunteering on Thursdays, claiming she came for the cookies and staying for the souls. The shop became a place people came to tell the truth. That did not surprise me. People will say the quiet thing out loud if you give them something beautiful to hold while they do it. Harlan finished the shelf and then pretended to need me for the ladder even when he didn't. We were finding the soft shape of siblings again. He didn't try to fix me. He handed me the drill and stood close enough to catch me if the world tilted. Once, over takeout at the back table, he put his hand over mine and said, I'm not trying to buy back our years, Flo. I know, I said. You're trying to buy me light. I'm taking it. On the morning of the hearing, I wore my blazer and my bravest earrings. Leslie met me on the courthouse steps with a file so organized it calmed the pigeons. Dr. Sato walked with us, her small frame containing an authority that made me want to stand up straighter. Harlan carried a box with 3 small potted herbs, rosemary for remembrance, thyme for courage, mint for clear testimony. He claimed they were for afterward, but I knew he was superstitious in the charming way men who break fences are. Caleb and Tara were already inside. She wore a white blouse so crisp it could cut, and he wore the face of a man who had not slept well. He hugged me brief, careful, pretend, and Tara nodded like we were colleagues in a field called familying. The judge was a woman whose gray hair had not asked anyone's permission to be beautiful. She read the file, looked at me over her glasses the way Leslie had, and said, Good morning, Miss Steele. Good morning, counsel. Let's keep this focused and kind. Tara's attorney, a man whose tie shouted, went first. He explained that my son was being a good son. He described me like a candle left near a curtain. He mentioned an incident where I had given the wrong change to a customer. True, I gave $1 too much. The customer corrected me and got a cookie and suggested that a recent transfer from my business account to my personal account showed impulsivity. Leslie later referred to that as moving money between pockets, as one does when buying eggs. Dr. Sato testified next. She did not perform for anyone. She described my assessment, my clock drawing, my good-smelling reasons for living. In my professional opinion, she said, Miss Steele has full decisional capacity. She can understand, appreciate, reason about, and communicate choices. Being 64 and happy is not evidence of incapacity. Leslie called Joy to the stand. Joy, bless her glittered nails and sharp tongue, testified how I'd negotiated the lease. She got me to knock off $500 a month in exchange for plants. Do I look like someone who lets a confused person out-negotiate me? The courtroom chuckled. The judge smiled into her sleeve. Then Leslie asked me to testify. My mouth went dry until Harlan pressed the mint plan into my hands like a quiet dare. I took the oath. I sat. I spoke. I'm not here because I never forget the stove, I said. I'm here because I remembered something important. I remembered that a life can change after 60. That money can arrive and not ruin you. That a son can be afraid and call it love. I talked about the shop, the chalkboard, the names of bouquets that children gave me when their mouths were full of cookie crumbs and courage. I described my ledger to an audience who, for once, wanted to hear about columns and totals. I explained profit margin like it was a hymn. I said I'd donate arrangements to the hospice and charge less on Tuesdays to anyone who brings in a library card. Leslie asked if I understood the risks of business. Yes, I said. Flowers die if you don't water them. Customers stop coming if you stop listening. Money disappears when you pretend it is smarter than you are. Then she played the voicemail. The courtroom went quiet with that special quiet that happens when truth walks in like it paid for a seat. Caleb didn't look at me. He looked at his hands. Tara's mouth tightened into a line you could measure lumber with. Miss Steele, the judge said when the sound stopped. Do you seek any protective orders? Leslie stood. We seek dismissal with prejudice of the guardianship petition, an order enjoining Mr. Steele from interfering with Ms. Steele's business accounts, and a directive that any future petitions concerning capacity include a certification from an independent evaluator. The judge leaned back and exhaled through her nose like a woman who has just seen a familiar play acted by new actors. Granted, she said. And Miss Steele? Yes, Your Honor. I hope those peonies are as good as counsel says. We spilled onto the courthouse steps into a day that felt scrubbed clean. Leslie hugged me the kind of hug lawyers pretend not to give. Dr. Sato accepted a bouquet called strong tea, lavender, eucalyptus, gratitude, and said she'd bring her mother by the shop. Reporters were not there. This wasn't that kind of story. But 3 older women who'd sat through the hearing patted my arm and whispered, for all of us. Caleb stood with Tara near the bottom of the steps, arguing quietly enough that only the flowers could hear. I could have walked past. I could have let the law be our only conversation. But he was still the boy who'd memorized my face. Caleb, I said. He turned, and the arguments fell off his shoulders like a coat he didn't want. Mom, he said. I'm... Not yet, I said, because sorry is a word best said once and after thinking. You heard the judge. You heard me. I'm going to keep doing this. If you'd like to be part of it, you can carry buckets on Saturdays. If you'd like to be less part of it, the shop opens at 10. You can stop by at 11 and buy Tara something that smells like trying. Tara stiffened. You just humiliated us. I just refused to disappear, I said. There's a difference. She looked at the courthouse doors as if they might open and give her a better ending. They didn't. Caleb swallowed. The voicemail. I didn't mean. You meant parts of it, I said. It's hard to tell which parts you meant more. I softened then, because motherhood is not a switch you flip off in victory. Come for dinner Sunday. Bring the kids. If you bring a binder, I'll make you eat outside with the mosquitoes. He laughed, shaky but true. Deal. Chapter 14. Bluebird and Bloom becomes a place to stand. News in small towns travels on the backs of good smells and better stories. Within a week, I had more customers than peonies. People came with hands in pockets and left with something living. The chalkboard became a local paper of the heart. This week's bouquets. Courtroom calm, white stock, sage, a lemon slice for brightness. New leaf, green hydrangea, fern, promise. Boundaries, thistle, ivy, uncompromising ribbon. A woman brought in her teenage daughter, who had dyed her hair a color the school did not understand. The girl stood with her arms crossed and her jaw set in a dare. I handed her the scissors and said, "Cut what you hate. Let's see what we can make with what you keep." She snipped with furious focus and left with a bouquet called Stay Loud, sunflowers, snapdragons, kindness. Mrs. Boone started a free reading hour on Wednesdays titled Stories and Stems. Kids who'd never sat still, crushed rosemary between their fingers, and listened to the old stories like they were news. Harlan made a sign for the window. "Bring your worry, we'll give you water." The shop hosted our first community night a month after court. We called it Letters to the Living. We set out note cards and pens and asked people to write one note to someone alive. People cried. People laughed. People bought more flowers than a Thursday deserves. One evening, as I flipped the sign to closed, a man hovered by the door as if the air on our side was easier to breathe. He was in his 50s, clean but more tired than most. He held a paper bag like it contained either dinner or the last of something. "Can I help you?" I asked, cracking the door. "I heard you help people who don't know how to ask for help," he said, summoning a smile that had not been used this week. "We sell flowers and tea and a little bit of courage," I said. "Which one do you need?" "Courage," he said. "And a job." His name was Raphael. He had been a landscaper until his back talked louder than his pride. I gave him a broom and a schedule, and within 2 weeks, he was inventing sturdier bouquet stands than I could afford to buy. He told me the mint grows better if you sing to it. He was right. Caleb came, binderless. Tara came, brittle. The kids ran through the trailer like a test of structural integrity. I made roast chicken and mashed potatoes the way love has always understood. We ate with a noise that means home is near. After dessert, Caleb lingered while Tara put the kids in the car. He looked at the sunflower with glasses above my sink and said, "Do you remember when I drew that?" "I remember when you insisted sunflowers wore hats," I said. "It was a hard year. The school called you disruptive because you corrected your teacher's dinosaur facts. You were insisting on the truth even when it annoyed people." He laughed, blushing at 10 years old from inside a 38-year-old face. "Mom, I'm sorry." The words finally arrived, honest and whole. "I know," I said. "Fix what you can. The rest, let time soften." He nodded. I talked to the firm. I asked for fewer hours and more truth. "Did they give you a cookie?" I asked. "Not yet," he said. "But I think they'll come around." The shop survived its first winter on wreath workshops, and the miracle of people deciding February deserved hyacinths. I paid bonuses I could afford and donated arrangements I couldn't. Harlan showed up with a plant every time he felt sorry for the past. I showed up with forgiveness every time I felt sorry for myself. In spring, a woman came in wearing a sweater that had weathered several storms. She set a wrinkled $5 bill on the counter and said, "My husband forgot me this morning. He knew me yesterday." She tried to smile and failed. I made her a bouquet called Remembering for Two, sweet peas, rosemary, gentleness, and wrote my phone number on the back of the receipt with the words, "Call me when it gets heavy." In summer, a teenager left a folded note under the cookie jar. "I'm not ready to say it out loud, but thank you for making a place where I could practice not being afraid." I taped the note inside the cabinet where we kept the vases that didn't match and decided mismatched things are the only honest kind. Dear Caleb, if you are reading this, it's because I decided to tell the truth a second time. Court was the first. This is the second. I know what fear tastes like. It tastes like cumin when you meant to reach for cinnamon. It tastes like pennies and missed buses. When Harlan handed me that box, I tasted fear and joy and a kind of relief I thought was reserved for other people. I also tasted a story ending if I let it. Poor woman gets lucky and gets put away. That's a story people will easily believe. It's tidy and sad. I am not tidy, and I am only sad on Tuesdays when the lilies don't open. You will spend your life deciding which stories to believe about the people you love. Please pick the ones that let them breathe. Please pick the ones that refuse to disappear them. If I am forgetful one day, the way you fear, then choose a story where my forgetfulness is met with patience, not paperwork. Choose a story where you come by with a lemon bar and tell me the same story for the 10th time because you're kind, not because I've earned it with a good memory. If you can't pick that story today, pick it tomorrow. If not, then Wednesday. I'll be here. The shop opens at 10. Mom. A year after Harlan knocked on my trailer door, we threw a party. We called it a grand continuing. We hung paper birds from the ceiling and filled the sidewalk pots with so much color Joy cried and blamed allergies. Benji cut a ribbon he insisted we should cut again every year. Leslie came with her wife and ate 2 cookies. Dr. Sato brought her mother, who declared the hydrangeas too showy and then bought 3. Caleb carried buckets and didn't flinch when I handed him a broom in front of customers. Tara brought a bundt cake that tasted like someone had finally followed the recipe and then added something risky. We talked like people who had read the same book and underlined different lines, but could still discuss it. I stood in the doorway and watched strangers become softer, which is all I ever wanted to see. Harlan nudged me and said, "You did this." "We did this," I said, and let pride sit in my chest without asking permission. Years later, when the peonies had taught me 10 new ways to be patient, I ran into the judge at the farmer's market. She was buying tomatoes with the attention of a woman who had never rushed a salad. "Miss Steele," she said, smiling the way people do when they remember a day that turned a corner. "Your Honor," I said, and handed her a small bundle of basil I had no right to give away free, but did anyway. She leaned in. "That day in court, when you talked about remembering after 60, that mattered to me. I went home and signed up for a pottery class. My husband says I've never been this messy or happy." We laughed. We parted. I bought peaches with the last of my singles and ate one leaning against the truck bed, juice running down my wrist, alive in a way that guardianship could never account for. People sometimes come in and ask how I did it, by which they mean how to build a life after someone tried to put them away while smiling. I tell them chalk is a business plan that forgives typos. That you can write new hours and mean new boundaries. That you can write we deliver and mean that you will show up when it counts, not just when it's convenient. That you can write NO returns and mean exactly the opposite. Bring back what you can't carry, I'll help. We added a little corner with brochures Leslie printed. Know your rights about guardianship. How to choose a power of attorney. Questions to ask before someone helps. People take them, slide them into purses, into back pockets, into the space between fear and a decision. The window unit in my trailer finally gave up and was replaced by a donated used one that purrs like a cat I can't afford to feed. I still live there because wealth doesn't have to move you to make you new. I like my neighbors. I like the kids who ride scooters and the old men who hold Congress and the way Mrs. Alvarez pretends not to notice when I leave flowers on her steps. Some nights, I count money not because I'm afraid, but because I'm planning for a scholarship for the teenager with the loud hair, for a back brace for Raphael, for a sign that doesn't flicker when it rains. Some mornings, before the shop opens, I sit in the doorway with my tea and watch the street wake up. The bus sighs. The pawn shop turns its key. The thrift store arranges a window display that dares you to imagine a different life from someone else's sweater. People pass and wave. Some come in. Some keep walking, holding the possibility of peonies like a secret they'll tell later. One late autumn afternoon, Tara called. Her voice was steady in the way people are steady when practicing. "Flora," she said. She had never called me that before. "Would you consider hosting a small workshop at the kids' school? About naming bouquets. About joy." I waited for a catch. None came. "Yes," I said. "But only if the parents have to make one too." She laughed. "Deal." At the workshop, grown men with important jobs asked if they could use the same ribbon as their kindergartners. Grown women cried while cutting stems, surprised by the precise weight of beauty. The kids named bouquets like poets on a sugar high. One little boy called his creation a nevermind, poppies, daisies, forgiveness. I wrote it on the chalkboard the next day. "I'm telling you this because someone will try to put you in a smaller room. They will have reasons. They will say words like safety and management and practical. They will sound like whether you can't argue with. If you are lucky, someone will show up with a box and a past they regret and an invitation to remember who you were before fear taught you your own name. And if no one shows up, maybe you will. Maybe you'll knock on your own door with a bouquet called Start Again, zinnias, mint, courage, and hand it to yourself. Guardianship, that word that almost turned me into paperwork, became a thing we talked about without whispering. Leslie's clinic grew. We found ourselves a community of people who were not broken, just underestimated. We made bookmarks that said, "You are not a lamp." We tucked them into bouquets so they'd travel into kitchens and break rooms and bedrooms where someone might need to find them while looking for scissors. Caleb volunteered once a month to deliver arrangements to the hospice. He said the first time felt like penance and the second time felt like purpose. By the third, he stopped telling me what it felt like and just did it. Tara began to bring clipboards to the shop not to control, but to organize volunteers. She found out she likes organizing things that breathe. Bluebird and Bloom turned 5. We didn't cut a ribbon. We cut cake. Epilogue, a note for the judge. Dear Your Honor, you probably don't remember me. I'm the grandmother who smelled like roses and printer ink. If you happen to stop by the shop on a Tuesday, you'll find a bouquet near the register called Gavel Tap, white peonies, sage, a sprig of mint, and a small sign that reads, "For anyone who made room for someone else's life to keep going." Thank you for not confusing fear with love. Thank you for hearing toner and truth and picking truth. With gratitude. Flora Steele, owner, Bluebird and Bloom. Postscript, if you're counting. If you're counting years, I'm 72 now. The window unit finally retired, and so did I halfway. Raphael manages the shop most days. Mrs. Boone runs stories and stems and brings in authors who used to be children with cookie crumbs on their courage. Harlan still brings plants like apologies and laughs at my jokes before I make them. Caleb and I disagree about politics, sprinklers, and the best way to roast chicken, and somehow we love each other anyway. Tara bakes cakes that never follow the recipe and somehow turn out, and I think she did the same thing with her life. Every Wednesday, a line of kids stands outside the door waiting to name bouquets that will be bought by grown UPS who decided to believe a better story. The chalkboard smudges and is cleaned and smudges again, like a life rewritten without shame. Sometimes customers ask if the shop was always meant to be. I tell them no. It was built from a knock at a trailer door, a box, a brother, a petition, 3 herbs in a courthouse, and a decision to be a person instead of a lamp. It was built from $1 million and a million small mercies. It was built from the late-in-life fact that a woman can choose her independence and walk it into a courtroom and then into a neighborhood until it smells like peonies and printer ink and something called freedom. And on days when the lilies don't open, I remind myself, fear can sit in the passenger seat. It just can't drive.
So another story of my grandmother has ended, and be clicking here, you will have when more such stories.